We're this little blue dot out in the middle of the universe. How long have we had computers? How long have we had planes? How long have we had cars? We're just beginning to revolutionize our way of life to be more sophisticated. There's a big range of a reasonable approach to the phenomenon, but in my opinion, when you become so certain there's nothing to see here, I just don't think that's intellectually grounded, not from my perspective. So like their get out of jail free card, so that they can't be judged about their past treatment of this topic because, oh, I was just waiting for the proof. Now the proof's here. What did you expect from me? And that doesn't work. And I'm going to be honest. If the Schumer bill gets passed and they don't find anything, I'm going to not be a very liked guy, because I'm going to be the guy that's going to say, well, look, it got passed. They didn't find anything. Now the skeptics have a much better argument. So what we're experiencing now has more weight by definition because it's not being introduced for the first time. It is part of a long thread of UFO history, so it's by definition, the accumulation principle, I guess, it's going to have more weight. Why doesn't X, Y, or Z just, spill the beans? And it's like, because the person that spills the beans is going to be like a historical figure for thousands of years, in some sense. And so a lot of people probably just perceive like, I'm not the one to be doing this. No, you spend an incredible amount of your time dumping on the topic because you are so certain that there's nothing to see here. I'm sorry. That is not an agnostic. That is not someone, in my opinion, who has a healthy approach to this scientific mystery. That is someone who is zealous, and every bit as zealous in some instances as the most rabid believer. And so that's kind of the way I see it.
All right, betters, welcome to the show. Look who I have in the house, Post-Disclosure World. Welcome to the show, man. I'm sure, do you like going by your YouTube moniker? Because people will call me Vetted. I'm like, my name's Patrick.
Yeah, right, you can call me Ryan. You can call me Post-Disclosure World. I used to have an old nickname, UFO Jesus, that I don't bring to the table much anymore. But you can call me whatever you want. It's all good at the end of the day.
UFO Jesus. I actually heard that from a lot of people when I told them I was going to be talking to you in my Discord. They're like, UFO Jesus. Dude, you got a lot of fans, by the way. I'm just going to tell you, you got a lot of fans. So
great.
This is going to be awesome. Well, good, man. Again, I'm so happy you came on the show. I've followed you sort of lurking in the background like a lot of creators do with other things, right? Because you're so focused on your own things. Sometimes it's hard to watch other creators and what they have going on, right? Like that sort of thing. So, but I have been very interested in different videos that you've made, because I'll be honest, all the creators in this space, you do bring a different color flavor to it that is kind of hard in this space to do, which you come at it very sensible, reasonable, philosophically. You're very smart, you're very insightful. You like to really look at what's behind the curtain, and I like that. You're open-minded, but at the same time skeptical about certain things. Like, I just seems very reasonable sort of approach to this, and that surprisingly is kind of hard to find in this space. So no matter what the topic, I know if you cover it, you're going to give a different angle I'm not going to hear from most everybody, which is really, really cool, which is probably how you've built, your following. But I'd be curious, asking one creator to another, what do you think has been sort of the reason for, your success, or why you think people tune in to your stuff?
Well, I'm very grateful that I do have an audience. My motivation getting into this space has been pretty specific, actually. The fire that drove me to get into this space is, frankly, because I wanted to influence the conversation. I wanted my perspective and my thought process to influence the overall conversation, partly because I think there's a lot of bad takes in this field. I think there's a lot of unfair takes. I think there's a lot of pettiness, a lot of jealousy, a lot of conspiratorial thinking that goes too far. And I just wanted to, have my perspective infiltrate the conversation. And that was really what drove me. It wasn't to become a UFO celebrity or anything like that. I mean, of course, I appreciate having a large audience and being able to express my opinion to a large audience. And I'm a human being. I like having people hang on to my words. That's just a human thing. But that really, that was not the driving force behind me getting into this. And I think what's led to my quote unquote success is, I think it's a multitude of things. I think I put a lot of work into every video I do. I don't try to half ass anything or just try to get something up for the sake of getting something up. And I think also that I feel very strongly about my perspectives that I share. They're not forced, they're not manufactured. And I guess just the way my brain works and the way I present my ideas seems to resonate with a fair amount of people. So, it's in some respect, it's the luck of the draw. I have my genetics, I have my experiences growing up, that everything that has contributed to who I am as a person and how I think about things and present things, and that just happens to resonate with a lot of people. So I've garnered a decent audience, and I'm grateful for it.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, well said. Yeah, I think it's interesting to hear why people, because as a creator, you have to look at it both ways, right? You are your own person and you're human, whatever. But at the same time, you're like, okay, I gotta actually look at what I'm doing, and if that is your motivation to infiltrate the conversation and get your opinion out, then you have to be self-aware of what you're putting out, what you're saying, how you're doing it, right? How you're presenting that. And you do want to sort of grab onto the things that are working, if you will, as well, right? Part of that. You want to still be true to who you are, but at the same time, you might have to change a couple things because it helps get your message out, better. So it's interesting to hear from you that. So yeah, that's really cool. I saw you do this video about Luis Elizondo and his new book that's coming out, right? August 20th. It got leaked, that could be its own discussion. The preview was put out. You made a video and I watched it and it was really, really good, first of all. And one thing you said actually near the beginning, which it just stuck with me throughout the video as you were talking. And I think it's an interesting conversation. So I'd like to pull the thread here with you. So you basically, and I'll put the final clip in the edit here. So I don't paraphrase you wrong, but basically the idea of being a skeptic, believer, right? There's this religious connotation that's labeled, right? Especially for people who are quote unquote believers, if you will, to use these labels, right? It's very dogmatic. This is very religious, your belief in it. But you also flip the coin on that, which I like because I like to do that myself, and said, well, the extremely skeptical viewpoint is also very dogmatic and religious. And I thought that was interesting. So I'd like to pull the thread on that. Like, can you just expand on that maybe a little bit more? And did I get that right?
I think that's correct. Yeah, I do think a lot. I mean, not all skeptics are the same,
Of
but
course.
on UFO Twitter, I do get the impression a lot of these skeptics are way too confident in their position, and it's not justified based upon the historical record. Um, their whole thought process is that, the mantra that they repeat over and over again is what's more likely, what's more likely. And the fact of the matter is we really don't know what's more likely. We know what's most likely based upon what we understand about the universe. But we're this little blue dot out in the middle of the universe. How long have we had computers? How long have we had planes? How long have we had cars? We're just beginning to revolutionize our way of life to be more sophisticated. But for thousands and thousands of years, yeah, we had agriculture and we created the wheel, but we have been living the same kind of lifestyle for so long. And it's only recently that new discoveries have dramatically shifted our world. So are we really at a point in time where we can be so definitive on what's possible? And that, unfortunately, to me, that's what skeptics do. They come under basically two categories. Either they're certain 100%, or they're so near certain they might as well be certain.
Sure.
And to me, that is a disservice to the mystery we have, and that is absolutely falls under the umbrella of dogmatism, as far as I'm concerned. I just think that if you really study UFO history, there's too many credible witnesses over such a long period of time, disparate sources, who have reported seeing the very same kind of things over and over again, whether it's flying saucers or triangular shaped craft, um, or poltergeist activity that occurs in association with their experiences. Disparate people will report the same thing. They've never met each other. They may not be, and I know for a fact they're not necessarily aware of all of the lore. Particularly decades ago, a good friend of mine, Finn Hanley, he has a channel, Finn 365, where he creates animations of people's claimed experiences. And he
Oh,
told, yeah, it's really interesting. You should
that's
check it out.
cool.
Finn
Yeah.
365. He's had 3 sightings of triangles. And one of the things he told me is like, "Oh, I hate having to tell people I've had three separate sightings because I'm a repeater." And if you're a repeater, you're obviously making it up, because why would you have 3 sightings and not just 1 sighting? Well, you're dealing with a higher, if UFOs are non-human intelligence, you're dealing with a higher intelligence. They're not going to operate according to your expectations necessarily. But one of the interesting things is that he said that, after one of his sightings, I don't remember the exact timeline, but he went into his apartment or his house, and his TV turned on, and that's never happened before, and it's never happened afterward, and he didn't think much of it. But later, a researcher, had a conversation with him on the phone, and the researcher's like, "Did you experience any poltergeist activity, any weird electrical experiences?" And then Finn goes, "Well, come to think about it, one day when I walked into my house, the TV just turned on. It was, maybe it was even unplugged. I don't know." But the point is that
Oh, wow.
this would be a perfect example of someone experiencing something that's deep in the UFO lore, but he had zero clue about that aspect of UFO lore. So this happens
Sure.
all the time, where people have experiences with the phenomenon that they didn't know from TV, they didn't know from books, and yet it is consistent with other people's experiences. And then this is an argument I make all the time, and I will never stop making this argument. If non-human intelligence has been here for decades, nobody from either side of the argument is going to dispute that it would leave a trace behind. You can't have alien technology in our biosphere for decades and decades, and it leaves no trace behind. No one, from the most rabid skeptic to the most rabid believer and everything in between, everyone would agree on that. So, from my perspective, all I'm acknowledging is the trace the phenomenon has left behind, because it would leave a trace behind. And another way to look at that is, if the U.S. government was covering up UFOs, could they do that without a trace? No, they could not do that without a trace. And a lot of skeptics, they like to frame it as if they're on this intellectual pedestal. They're like, well, if proof ever comes out, then I'll accept it, but there's no proof. So in this environment, I'm just going to say it's all nonsense and ridicule it. But that is such a bizarre way to approach it, because this is not this they seem to see this as a way to, that's like their get out of jail free card, so that they can't be judged about their past treatment of this topic, because, oh, I was just waiting for the proof. Now the proof's here. What did you expect from me? And that doesn't work, because if proof ever emerges that non-human intelligence is here, then it makes people like David Grush and people like Lou Elizondo as actual real witnesses, and thousands of people that have come forward over the decades. You can't claim that, oh, I'm just going to accept the evidence when it occurs, because if we ever do get smoking gun evidence, it proves that there was a trace left behind. So it's kind of a disingenuous approach, in my opinion. But getting back to the
Hmm.
specificity of what you mentioned, yeah, I do think they're dogmatic, and I do think there's a religiosity to it. I think if you're spending all day, or even just you're spending a lot of time ridiculing the topic, when you could be reading books about history and science and philosophy, you could be creating YouTube videos, you could be, fishing or playing sports, but no, you spend an incredible amount of your time dumping on the topic because you are so certain that there's nothing to see here. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That is not an agnostic. That is not someone, in my opinion, who has a healthy approach to this scientific mystery. That is someone who is zealous every bit as zealous in some instances as the most rabid believer. And so that's kind of how the way I see it.
Yeah, look, well said. One thing I would, I guess, ask for, not necessarily pushback, but like what do you think about someone who says, okay, I want to wait for proof, but I'm just going to go live my life. So they're not ridiculing or putting down the topic. They just aren't in it. There's no proof. So I'm out, I'm doing my thing. Hey, call me when, how do you feel about something like that?
I think that's incredibly healthy. Incredibly
Okay.
healthy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think that's
Right
a
on.
very valid way.
So that's
Look,
the difference, right? Is that it's not that just they're waiting for proof, is that in
they're
the
like
meantime, they're
they're
going
on
to
a
be actively going
yeah, they're
after
on
the
a
topic.
crusade. They
Yeah.
are literally on a crusade. And one thing I've said, and I've said this for a long time, I even said this, I believe, on Mick West's podcast, because I've been on his podcast before. I said, look, my perspective is that there's a range of reasonable perspective when it comes to UFOs. If you're completely certain that it's non-human intelligence, from my perspective, you're going too far unless you've seen the phenomenon yourself. But on the other extreme is if you're like you're 99.9% certain, or you're completely certain there's nothing to see here, that's also extreme. I just don't think we know enough about the universe to be so certain
Yeah.
about that. So that's,
Yeah.
so I'm not saying my way or the highway.
Sure.
I admit that I lean strongly in my bias toward there is something here. Um, like I said, I think there's a big range of a reasonable approach to the phenomenon. But in my opinion, when you become so certain there's nothing to see here, I just don't think that's intellectually grounded, not from my perspective.
No, I honestly, I can't disagree, and I've said that on Vetted myself. Either extreme, you sort of lose the label. It's like politics, right? You lose the label of swap out. Not to get political, and I'm not trying to, but or partisan, but you know what I mean. You sort of it blurs the line. So it's the same. Any extreme is never good because again, like you professed here just a minute ago, you're basically guaranteeing the outcome for people, right? No, no, no. This is the conclusion. I'm absolutely certain, and there is no budging. Well, that's not good on either end, in my opinion, unless, like you said, you had a personal experience, which I think does set you in a different camp, for sure. What about you, Ryan? Have you had your own personal experience and or experiences?
Um, uh, I'll let me put it this way. I saw an object in the sky once, but I don't think it was anything anomalous. But under the umbrella of UFOs, I've never seen. And not only have I never seen a UFO, I actually look up at the sky all the time, and if you look long enough and you have an objective mindset, it's pretty easy to know you're looking at something prosaic. Planes have those lights that blink so that they don't run into other planes, or you'll notice that they're moving in a trajectory that is how planes move, slowly but surely in one trajectory. Helicopters, you can tell, and this is important because not all witnesses are equal. Right? Somebody might see what have seen in the past and be like, "Oh, I saw a UFO," but not all witnesses are equal. So if you have 10,000 witnesses or 100,000 witnesses going back in time, I personally think statistically it's likely that some of them actually saw what they said they saw. Number one, and number two, there are different kinds of experiences people have. Some people see lights in the sky, but other people literally see unambiguous craft at close range. And I'll give you a perfect example of that. In the movie The Phenomenon by James Fox, in the opening of the movie, real early on in the film, he shows Colonel William T. William T. Cohen, I think is his name, Coleman, William T. Coleman. And as it goes, he was ferrying a B-25 bomber from Miami to Mississippi.
Okay.
And during that broad daylight, he claims that he saw something off into the distance, and then it came closer, and it was literally a perfect flying saucer. It wasn't ambiguous at all. So that's not comparable to someone that sees something in the night sky that's small but looks mysterious. Those are two completely
Sure.
different situations. And he said that he overtook it somehow so you get a better look at it. And he was in close proximity to it. He was at low altitude. The flying saucer was even lower altitude. And so it was above the ground. So he could gauge distance because the flying saucer was above the ground. And he said, this is a he's a decorated World War II pilot. He's very sane. He said it was a perfect flying saucer, metallic, could not be mistaken for anything else. Now, in my opinion, with a situation like this, we have very few options. One, he's lying. Two, he's hallucinating. Or three, he saw what he said he saw. I doubt he's lying. I doubt he's hallucinating. I think he probably saw what he said he saw.
With me now are two retired Air Force colonels who were actively involved in that inquiry. Colonel Robert Friend, who headed up Project Blue Book for 5 years, and Colonel William Coleman, a former Air Force squadron commander who was Pentagon spokesman and chief of public information for the Air Force. Colonel Friend, Colonel Coleman, welcome. Have either of you ever seen a UFO?
Yes, it was 1955, and I was a squadron commander at the time. We were flying a B-25 over Alabama when we spotted a strange silvery object some 25,000 feet above us, heading in the same direction. Since we were overtaking it, I changed course and eventually got within 1/8 of a mile of it, literally right on top of the thing.
So you must have gotten a fairly good look at it.
We certainly did. The whole crew. It was wingless, a disc some 70 feet in diameter, 15 feet thick at the center, your average run-of-the-mill flying saucer.
And what happened then?
It performed an astonishing maneuver. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone. But we chased it and caught sight of it again. It was skimming over a farmer's field, kicking up vortexes of red dust as it flew. We closed in on it from behind the trees, but it vanished.
Mm-hmm. Did you make a report of this incident?
Well, I wrote up reports. I was later debriefed by an intelligence officer. And years later, when I was on Project Blue Book, I tried to find my report. It was not in the files.
Not in the files.
And these examples have happened over and over again in history. One of the more well-known is the USS Nimitz UFO event series from, I think it was 2004. In that instance, you have 4 witnesses, and they all say they saw the same thing. And then you have a plane come off the Nimitz a little bit later and actually gets footage of a object, which, by the way, does not look like a plane in the distance. I know Mick West tries to make that argument. I don't think that looks like a plane in the distance. And I think, yes, it's convenient to say, oh, it's just a plane in the distance and everything just happened to come together like that. Well, that's kind of UFO history. Everything this is coincidences. Mysterious things happen, and coincidence. People win lottery ticket all the time, but I'm not satisfied with that rebuttal.
Yeah, no, well, again, context matters. So it's difficult sometimes to just look at a photo or a video and judge it just on that. Sometimes that's all you can do, but a lot of times taking in the context of everything around what surrounded that photo or that video, right? And if you take all the context around the Tic Tac, clearly it's not a plane. They knew what they were capturing was the same thing they had chased before and had been chasing, and there was multiple yada yada yada, right? So no, I'm with you. What do you think is like your most, what do you feel is the most exciting sort of UFO event that's out there, or that really, makes you a believer or leans towards that?
Yeah, I definitely could. When people ask me, and it's changed over time. I would say I have 95% confidence that some UFOs represent non-human intelligence. And some would say, oh, you're near certain. I'd say, yeah, I'm near certain, but I'm still giving like a 5. Like, imagine if the most rabid skeptics today actually gave a 5% chance that any particular UFO from UFO history represented non-human intelligence. They would be completely different skeptics. They don't give a 5% chance. They're either totally certain or so certain they might as well be certain. I give myself at least a little bit of credit. I'm a fallible human being. Maybe I'm just not connecting the dots or analyzing the data adequately.
Sure.
But I would say it's not a singular event. What I would say is it's the preponderance of evidence going back 70 plus years that manifests in various different ways. It manifests from people witnessing objects, sometimes unambiguously at very close range. It manifests at how shady the U.S. government has been about why. Let's put it. We can word it this way: why are witnesses coming out of the U.S. government, whether they're current employees or past employees? Why have they been doing this for 70 plus years, saying, "Oh yeah, the U.S. government's covering it up"? Well, the skeptic will tell you because one of their favorite retorts is there's a mind virus in the Pentagon. So I guess if we take this to the logical conclusion, there's been a mind virus for 70 plus years. And not only has there been a mind virus in the Pentagon, but also in addition to that, people all over the world are seeing the same exact thing over and over again. I don't know. So I would say it's not a singular event that makes me think the probability is high that we are dealing with non-human intelligence. It's the preponderance of evidence over time and the patterns that have emerged from disparate sources. Sometimes they don't know each other. Sometimes they are not conversant in UFO history, and yet they're still reporting back old patterns. And I just think that's likely beyond coincidence.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's kind of hard to ignore all of it, right? And the more you get into it, the more you realize actually how much there is. And some would say, you know, too much sometimes, too much to go through, too much to filter out. Which would be a good question for you, right? With so many stories, with this preponderance of evidence, right, that you speak of, which I agree. How do you go about filtering out some of the, BS and some of the stuff that you're like, not gonna, there's only so much time, right? So, where do you try to focus your efforts?
Yeah, I mean, look, humans are humans. There's all kinds of scenarios, and I, I try to respect everyone's testimony. And I'm not going to say you're a liar, or I don't believe you, because I don't know at the end of the day. But
Sure.
if we're being honest, some people LARP because it maybe they're bored with life and they want people to pay attention to them, and so they make up stories. Some people are not very good witnesses, so they think they saw something in the sky when all it was Venus or a satellite or something prosaic like that. And some people, in my opinion, are telling the truth, and their rendition of what they saw is very close, if not completely accurate to what they saw. And so I just try to focus on the most credible reports, the Nimitz, Lonnie Zamora, cases like that, where the people that are reporting are highly credible or there's high corroboration, multiple witnesses.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean it's an art, I guess. I wasn't there. I didn't really read anything about it, but like, and this is not necessarily a compliment to my research approach. It may actually be a criticism to it.
All right.
But like with the Las Vegas thing, I didn't even look into it. I heard it
Yeah.
for a moment. I'm like, nope, not even going there. And I'm
Sure.
not saying that's a good thing. That's
Sure.
me not being open minded. But it's interesting because people may perceive me as like this rabid believer, but actually I'm a very cynical person. I'm a very cynical person in some respects. I'm very skeptical. And I think the reason I'm cynical and skeptical in my own way is because I feel like I understand human nature very well. And maybe that's a little cocky of me, but I kind of feel like that's one of my talents. I understand human nature. So I know that people are going to be driven to make things up and to lie and to LARP. I know that. That's just built into human DNA. So that kind of
Yeah.
factors into why some of the stuff I hear, I'm like, okay, if there's something to it, I'm sure we'll hear more about it later. And if there's nothing
Yeah.
to it, it'll probably eventually get debunked. And I'm not criticizing anyone who's covered that story because it is interesting and it's part of ufology. But in my
Oh, yeah.
cynicism, I tend to just not even research that. And that, like I said, that might be a criticism to my approach to the topic, but that's just kind of the way I handle it.
No, a lot of times everything's about perspective, and it's just how you look at things. It's not necessarily right or wrong, or right, you know what I mean, or complimentary or detrimental to your research. It's your time. You have to decide, right? And there's a big part of just using your gut or trusting your instinct a little bit to at least filter out a few, and then move into right. And like you said, a lot of things will rise to the top. So you may be like, well, I'll come back to that later. And if there's something there, it will eventually people
Right.
start covering it, and it'll rise to the top. So I totally get your point. I get that question a lot of, what do I cover? I think that's why people like the vetted show. It's just because it's daily, not because it's good, but just because every day I'm at least filtering down to some little story that you can, you know, look into further if you want to, but there is just so much out there, so many books, so many testimonies, just so much. Speaking of books, you seem like the perfect person to ask this question to. So, if you had to recommend a few books to somebody, let's do it this way instead. Let's say one book you would recommend to somebody who's brand new to the topic, and one book you would recommend to somebody who's fairly deep into the topic.
Yeah, I don't know. I think Leslie Kane's book UFOs is a really good one, and I think that kind of goes over some of the best sightings. And what I like about her book is she's not the only author. She actually has the people who experienced, like generals or members of government, write the chapters from their own experience. It's well researched. I think that would be a great book. And I think if I guess if you wanted to go deep into the topic in more explorative fashion and not just people citing sightings and the corroboration and the historical value of it, I think Jacques Vallée is a really interesting um, path to deepen
Yeah,
your theoretical perspective of the phenomenon. Because if let me be honest, if we're being honest, we really just don't know much about the phenomenon. We have a lot of theories, but do we have a lot of facts? I like what Commander David Fravor says. He says, "What are people saying they're an expert on UFOs? I'm the expert on UFOs. I chased the damn thing, you know." So there's a lot of truth to that. Um,
yeah,
yeah, we have lots of stories. You know, we have you can get thousands of stories from people who claim they've been abducted, or who have had experiences with the phenomenon, telepathic downloads, and you can read about Skinwalker Ranch. But what does that really teach us about the phenomenon? It just all it does in some capacity is it creates more questions than it does answers, which I
sure,
think is critical to why we need disclosure. Because some people act like they know the truth about the phenomenon, and one of my classic retorts to that is, well, if we knew the truth about the phenomenon, we wouldn't all be debating what it means and what the origin is and why they're here. Because when you have a fact, you don't debate facts. No one's debating whether water boils at 212, or when Abraham Lincoln was the president of the United States. Facts are just accepted. So we just, at this point, we can put puzzle pieces together as best we can, and read books, and try to learn from the best minds in this field. But at the end of the day, we're still kind of in the dark, which is why one of the great reasons I think we need disclosure, so that we stop looking at this as some fringe thing and can look at it more as a scientific mystery, which if we saw it through that lens, there would be a much greater incentive to get to the bottom of it. So if the US government does have smoking gun evidence, which I believe they do, they need to start sharing some of that so that our great institutions are not wasting their time. Because if our great institutions are not utilizing their time and energy to attain answers to this great mystery, then a lot of the resources are simply being wasted. And I don't think any of our institutions would deny that. Ask any institution, scientific institution, philosophy, the humanities, all of them would say, yes, if we knew there was non-human intelligence here, we would spend a lot more time trying to get to the bottom of it. But they're not doing that. Why? Because in my opinion, there has been a multi-decade cover-up instituted not just by the US government, but other governments have been involved in it. And this is not the way to go when you consider that UFOs may represent the greatest scientific mystery of our time.
yeah. Well said. I was told that you go on really good rants, and the people were right. Vetters, you were right. Ryan is awesome. They were right. They told me they were
Well,
like,
let me
dude,
play this.
he's gonna
I
go
know,
on
I
some
know you.
good rants. I was like, yes.
I know you interviewed James Iandoli, and I have not yet got to the interview. But James Iandoli once said, "I'm the best in the business in the UFO field when it comes to rants," and I always thought that
I
that was
love
pretty
it.
funny.
Dude, you are. That's great. No, I love that.
I can get a
You
little
know,
unhinged. I can get a little unhinged though, so I gotta watch it.
don't worry, I'm Latin, dog. Don't worry about it. Are you kidding me? That's like being at home, like no big deal. That's nothing to me. Um, no, I love your passion and your energy for it, and a lot of what you says is again very reasonable. So, you talk about why we need disclosure, and that essentially you're kind of saying that, well, we're wasting valuable resources. Well, I don't know if you said that, but we are essentially wasting valuable resources in this cover up, right? Think about it.
Oh
All the
yeah.
work is going into just the cover up. Stop that. Let's put the money and effort in towards the next step, right? I'm with you. Make it a fact and let's move on. So, is that why you called your channel Post Disclosure World, or where does that come from? Or,
Yeah, it's funny. I heard the term post-disclosure world like 7 years before I even made my first video. And
Okay.
when I heard it, I'm like, wow, that's it, man. That is the word. And I
Yeah.
think I created my YouTube channel and created the extension and the whole nine because I planned that if I was ever going to make a channel, I want it to be called Post Disclosure World, and I'm quite happy with that because
Oh,
it's
that's
it's
cool.
really a word, a term that is used over and over again from so many people. So to be able to be branded by
Sure.
that term is kind of cool.
Yeah.
But I guess it's also aligns with my focus as a channel because I do talk a lot. I do cover the disclosure process in particular and the theoretics and philosophy of going from a pre-disclosure world to a post-disclosure world. And so, yeah, that's kind of why I named my channel Post-Disclosure World.
Yeah, I love it. No, look, I get all the time vetted. What do you don't vet anything, Patrick? Why you just need to change your name of your channel to Petted? I got that was pretty funny when they said that. But yeah, I mean, I I like the name first of all, but that for me that term post disclosure world has is kind of new to me because I'm definitely more new to this topic than you are, and I heard basically Danny Sheehan describing what the New Paradigm Institute was, and then when I talked to Steve Bassett, right, that's what the new Paradigm Research Center. Which I was like, you guys got to stop using paradigm. Everyone's getting confused here, but this idea that these programs are set in place, even Soul or any of these nonprofits you can think of, they're set up for post disclosure, not to get us disclosure. And I'll be honest, I was like, oh, okay, I understand it now. You want things in place for when that moment happens. There's already sort of this basic infrastructure in place to help people process right this new reality. What do you think are some areas that we should be setting up infrastructure to right help us process? What do you think is missing out there?
Whew. Yeah, I mean, I like what Soul's doing with that objective to help us transition or to engage the world when we go from a pre-disclosure world to a post-disclosure world. I think when we finally get disclosure, and a lot of people don't like the word disclosure, it's such a stigmatized word, which is why I often say UFO
It,
confirmation. I
yeah,
often
I
use that
agree.
word because people
Sure.
just despise the word disclosure, and I guess because it
Yeah,
has a lot of baggage. But I also find it kind of whimsical, so I see it from two different angles.
sure.
Um, I think I think Richard Dolan has said this before. Like you can't like no one can prepare to have a child. When you have your child, you have to deal with it when you have a child, right? So in that same vein, no one can really prepare for a post disclosure world. It's just going to be something we're going to have to collectively deal with. Um, and interestingly, I know Matthew Pines did an interview recently, and he talked about how he I don't know if this was based on people he spoke to or he was just inferring from the past 6 years, but he said basically that over these years from like the New York Times article to now, the point was never to convince 8 billion people we're not alone. The point was
Correct.
every single month to get more people
Yeah.
to believe it because it would help acclimate us to that reality without being um, unnecessarily disruptive. Um, and I think there's truth to that. I think there's truth to that. I think those involved have that as part of the equation in their mind that this is a process and they're not just going to one day lay it all out so that the whole world is like has to be a recipient to that trauma, if you will. They're preparing us for it. I suspect that is part of the equation. That doesn't necessarily mean it's like all planned out and there's this big manuscript they're using on how to employ it. No, I don't think so. But I do think they as part of their perspective, they don't want to bring it all out. And I also think it's complex. Some people in the government and that are associated with the secrecy never want it to come out. Some people do want it to come out. Some people don't want it to come out the way it's coming out, may want it to come out a different way.
Yeah.
But from my perspective, the post-disclosure world represents a lack of certainty. That's how I view the post-disclosure world. Because when you're finally given this perspective that we're not alone, governments have been successfully able to lie about it. The non-human intelligence itself has been able to create this fine tuning, if you will, where they allow themselves to be seen, but not quite enough for us to get proof. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think they're intentionally doing that. All of a sudden, we're exposed to like a whole new lens to view reality through. Because how many skeptics have said, for example, that if any government was covering up, we would know? They say that with such confidence. Well, what happens if it wasn't just the U.S. government covering up? What if the U.S. government's allies also knew about this on some
Yeah.
level? What if Russia also knew about it? What if China also knew about it? If that's the case, then a lot of these skeptics that are so certain in how the world works are going to have to reevaluate all of reality. So to me, it's post-disclosure world is kind of represented by acknowledging that we don't know as much as we thought we knew. And I don't think there's any institutions that's going to be untouched, including religion, by the way. The story of Adam and Eve and how humanity got here. Well, what if we were genetically engineered to some extent by this non-human intelligence? What if we were seated here, millions of years ago? Um, the complexities that emerge are endless, and I think certainty of many items we take for granted is going to go out of style in a post-disclosure world.
Yeah. I would add, like, I think there needs to be a focus on some of the things that would be forgotten about, which is like legislatively, how does that impact, right? What laws need to be put in place to help with that, right? Like if you encounter a being or this or that other, right? If you attack one, is there some, you know what I mean? Like, what are some, I mean, basic laws, just laws of whatever it may be. I wouldn't even know where to begin, a lawyer, but I think some of the things you people would just forget about, because there's all the sort of might seem obvious sort of responses to this, new reality, which would be emotional support, right? These other philosophical support, right? Okay, religious support, but yeah, but okay, but let's think about logistically, infrastructure wise. What do we need to put in place for this new reality? Because let's be real, in my opinion, that basic disclosure, and I think that's where that word gets confusing for some people, and I have to define it all the time on my channel. Basic disclosure, more rounded out disclosure. I mean, it depends what you're saying when you say disclosure. What new reality are you saying is in this disclosure, right? So I think helping define that, but it would just lead to more questions, in my opinion, a bazillion more questions, right? Because now, even if I think even the strongest believers would even be rocked by that, because I think even the strongest believer thinks the thing it real whatever, but then for it to be like, oh no, I'm not crazy. I still think they would even have a leap up of holy shit, this is insane. And yeah, that's also interesting to think about. But yeah, just some of those things that would be forgotten about, right? I just think there needs to be some of these meetings, and to be honest, I think they're having these sort of conversations and talks, and that could be some of the boring aspect to the UFO stuff that people don't want to look into or like Carl Nell's presentation at Seoul, right, where he's kind of getting nuts and bolts, and he's got the whiteboard and the Excel spreadsheets up and stuff. I actually like that boring stuff in a way, because it's very okay, this is a real plan here. That's why I enjoyed Matthew Pines speaking about the UAP amendment and what's happening. So, speaking of, like, how do you feel about this, UAP legislation that's going through?
I think it's absolutely necessary. I know it's not romantic and sexy, but
Yeah.
I feel like I feel like you need this legislation to break this open, because those that are embedded in the secrecy don't want this to ever come out. I mean, there are exceptions, but it seems like those that have the most power are really reluctant, and they're just never going to voluntarily bring this out. So you need the force of law to do it, legislation,
Yeah.
and I just feel like it's the only thing that's going to get this out. Barring mass sighting, where the phenomena itself allows itself to be proven, that could also do it. Or
That's interesting.
um, Another country could do it, of course. Like if China wanted to be like, well, I don't want the US to have that legacy because, I mean, think about the legacy you'll have if you're the first country to disclose the truth about non-human
Yeah.
intelligence. I mean, that legacy would be infinite. I mean, as long as human beings were around, they would remember that country for being the one country to
Right.
finally, give the truth to the people.
Yeah.
But yeah, you need the legislation. And it, you need the legislation. Otherwise, like, how else are you going? Like, because it's this data and this secrecy
We
is,
live in a legislative world. It's that simple,
yeah,
right?
and the secrecy is bound by law. It's classified, so you have to
Yeah.
make it unclassified.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
Yeah.
you're never going to tell people about it. It's just going to
Right.
be, oh, it's classified. We can't talk about it. Okay, great. Now we're never going to have government officials admit to the reality the way they could admit to it. So yeah, I definitely think the legislation is paramount.
For sure. Are you I don't know, just your personal opinion, like, do you think there's things you wish they would have added to this legislation, or and like what do you think the odds are of it kind of getting through the way they want it to or whatever?
Yeah, I don't think I would add anything to it. I probably haven't thought hard enough about it.
Sure.
I'm sure that Chris Mellon's fingerprints are all over that legislation, and he probably covered his bases pretty well. I think even David Grush has contributed to it, and he knows the infrastructure, the secrecy, pretty darn well. Do I think it's going to get through? I tend to be optimistic. Optimism is my bias when it comes to disclosure. Some people could even claim that's part of my brand. I'm okay with that. I prefer to be optimistic over pessimism. Although,
Sure.
George Knapp has influenced me a lot because, like, if you watch Weaponized with George Knapp and Jeremy Corbell tends to be the one a little bit more optimistic, and George Knapp tends to be a little bit more pessimistic. And I think he said something to the
Sure.
effect of, the people that are like in control of the secrecy are better at what they do than those that are trying to get transparency. So you always have to keep that in mind. They're highly motivated and they're really good at what they've done. And they're obviously really good at it because we've had secrecy for 70 plus years. So it is a bit of an uphill battle. And I do try to not get too optimistic. So I will admit it is absolutely possible that this legislation will not get passed. However, if it doesn't, if it gets gutted the same way it got gutted in the initial attempt, to me, that's going to look really suspicious. Like, if there's nothing to see here, why are you gutting it? Do you want the conspiracy? Like, if you're a government official and you're not happy about these conspiracies that people like Lou Elizondo and David Grush have been adding fuel to, wouldn't you want to put an end to that? Wouldn't you want something absolutely official that would completely contradict their claims? And now, let's be honest, the Arrow historical report is not that, because the Arrow historical report basically encompasses the DOD investigating itself. That would
Yeah.
be like the
Yeah.
Reagan administration investigating the Iran-Contra scandal. Oh, there's nothing to see here? Great. I mean, of course they're going to look out for themselves and protect their hide. That's human
Yeah.
nature. So you do need something like the Rounds-Schumer legislation. It's good. If it doesn't get passed, I'm going to find that really suspicious, because one of the things I've said to the skeptics on my Twitter feed is, I'm like, look, do you want this to go back to pre-December 16th, 2017 levels, the UFO issue? I can't think of a more straightforward and productive and effective way than to get the Rounds-Schumer legislation passed. If they don't find anything, I'm sorry, Patrick, people like you and people like me we may not be out of business completely, but we're not going to get the views we're getting now, because that legislation getting passed, and with all the measures put into it, with the UAP disclosure review board, subpoena power, I think it's like things have to be declassified from if they're 25 years old. If something doesn't get declassified, it has to be explicitly explained to Congress, perhaps why it's not declassified, and they have to tell Congress what they're going to do in order to get it declassified. I mean, there's all these incredible measures, and I'm going to be honest. If the Rounds-Schumer bill gets passed, and there's nothing, and they don't find anything, I'm going to not be a very liked guy, because I'm going to be the guy that's going to say, well, look, it got passed, they didn't find anything. Now the skeptics have a much better argument, and it will take the wind out of the believers' sails. It really will. I mean, is the mainstream media really going to cover the UFO issue the same way they have for the past 6 years if the Round Schumer bill gets passed and after a very exhaustive investigation they find nothing? What is Lou Elizondo going to say? What is Chris Mellon going to say? What is David Grush going to say if everything they've been working toward, all of them have been working toward this legislation, it gets passed, nothing is found? They're going to lose so much credibility, whether it's fair or not. They're going to lose credibility, and I'm probably going to have a lot less views from that moment forward. So I don't really understand why skeptics would not be every bit as enthusiastic, if not more enthusiastic, than people like me to get it passed, because it's the ultimate test. It's the ultimate way to falsify. Is it a perfect falsification? No, because people could always say, well, they're just covering it up further, but it's a pretty good falsification. And, falsification doesn't have to be black or white. I could say that if the Round Schumer legislation gets passed and they end up finding nothing, no cover up, no non-human intelligence after an exhaustive investigation encompassing lots of different people and organizations, then I'm sorry, that makes it much less likely that there ever was a cover up in the first place. And that's just the reality of the situation.
The United States government has gathered a great deal of information about UAPs over many decades, but has refused to share it with the American people. That is wrong, and additionally, it breeds mistrust. It's essential we keep working on our proposal to create an independent, presidentially appointed review board that can oversee UAP classified records and create a system for releasing them where appropriate to the public.
I think there's many fights that can happen at one time. So supporting this legislation is like, great, Monday, Tuesday, I'm going to do this, Wednesday, that. Does that make sense? Like, you can support this legislation, hope it gets through, hope it gets going. But also notice there's a lot of citizen sort of disclosure movements, right? People trying to go out and do citizen research, which is nice, but at the end of the day, that's definitely not going to move the needle the best way. I'm with you. I think there's a lot of support for the legislation. Like a lot of political movements, they don't necessarily happen overnight, right? Something very important can take a long time to get through. You have to keep fighting in Washington. It could take years, decades sometimes. Some movements take decades, literally. So how, you didn't have to argue, well, when have we really started fighting for this? Is it really just within the last couple of years? And if we're looking at forest through the trees, then, it's kind of hasn't been that long, right? So it can take a little bit longer to get some of this through. And the more hearings they have in the meantime, the more whistleblowers that come forward that have firsthand knowledge and start presenting some of this other stuff. I mean, like you said, Matthew Pines wants, or their plan is to acclimate people little by little every month, which I agree with that process in the end, even if it's not what people want right away. Right. It makes sense logically. So yeah, I mean, what roadblocks do you see that could get in the way of this legislation, if any? Like, what do you think
Yeah.
could be in the way?
Well, I think Dean Johnson, who's been on top of the whole legislative path regarding uh, the UFO issue, I think he said that it was the Pentagon that was getting in the way of the legislation passing and not like Lockheed Martin. So I don't know what the ultimate truth is, but
Yeah.
whatever influenced members of Congress that stood in the way from the House, that could happen all over again. And I think that's exactly why, I think that's exactly why what's going to happen in the next few weeks and months is going to happen. Matthew Pines went into this, a big motivation behind Lou Elizondo's book coming out, then various documentaries coming out. And also Matthew Pines said someone that we would recognize will come out and vouch for David Grush, someone very significant. And I also think he said multiple people in addition to that will come out and
Correct.
vouch for David Grush. So you got both
Yeah.
of those things. That is not.
Let's come back to that because I want to know who
Okay.
you think that is. But finish your thought,
Oh,
please.
yeah. That is. I mean, that's not to entertain us or to make life more exciting or to give me more stuff to cover on my YouTube channel. They're not thinking about that. They're doing that. It appears because they know that to end the cover up, you need to get this legislation passed, and by Lou Elizondo coming out with this new book and all these documentaries and then officials coming forward and saying, yep, the government's not being forthright with you. How do you justify maintaining legislation that will test the government's narrative after all that's occurred. It's going to be pretty hard to justify that.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. Again, I'm happy to support this fight for that amongst other things, right? Because on a day-to-day basis, people aren't they don't really need help with that, if that makes sense. Like your average person with the phenomena or whatever, right? People in my Discord, people in my Patreon, people who I communicate with, they're having personal experiences and they're trying to understand them now in this moment, right? What's going on? What did I see? How do I function now? These sorts of things. So there could be many fights going on. So that's why I think what you offer, what I offer, what a lot of other creators who might offer, it helps along the way in a way. So, all right, getting back to this sort of, bombshell, if you will, that Matthew Pines wanted to drop on everybody, at least get people going, like, the coup de grace, as he put it, this person that's gonna come out, and everyone's trying to speculate who is this main person. I know we talk about a couple other people and documentary this, but who is this who do you think this, like, who you see on the news, right? That guy, who do you think this could be?
So Carl Nell, it's very important. Most people may have heard of David Grush, who's the intelligence officer who testified to some of the stuff. Carl Nell is more senior to David Grush, but from the Army, also liaison to the UAP task force that David Grush was on, and it was in that role that David Grush, discovered these programs as part of this congressional mandate to report back on these things that whistleblowers have been talking about. Carl Nell has had lots of very senior positions. He was a senior executive in both Lockheed and Northrop, as well as on Army Futures Command. I believe he's his firsthand knowledge of some of these programs. And he stated, at the SALT conference, Scaramucci's conference, like a month or two ago, he had the final keynote session, and he came out and his first, scripted line was basically, non-human intelligence is real. Non-human intelligence is here and has been interacting with humanity for a long time. And senior non-elected government officials are aware of that fact. So he just came out the gate, retired Colonel Carl Nell, senior guy, defense. He was involved in our foreign technology program, which is our reverse engineering program for foreign systems. He's held very serious positions. He said that. So the ratchet was kind of like David Grush, the first guy, Carl Nell coming out validating that. He validated it before in the initial article, but he just kind of came hard to the paint and said it just straight out. And people would just, and there was like an investors conference, like, what did that guy just say? Like, what?
Do you believe that a higher form of non-human intelligence has visited this planet?
Right. So non-human intelligence exists. Non-human intelligence has been interacting with humanity. This interaction is not new, and it's been ongoing. And there are unelected people in the government that are aware of that.
How confident are you that that is true?
There's zero doubt.
So Lou Elizondo's book, in fact, I read the first few chapters already. The full book hasn't come out. It's going to be a wild book, I'll tell you that.
What's it called?
It's called Imminent.
Oh, the Imminent book, okay.
Yeah, and so, but then that's going to trigger these documentaries, other people, and then I believe the coup de grace will be coming sometime this year with someone that everyone would recognize if they watch, if they paid attention to the news, you would know this person.
Something, I honestly don't have a clue.
Really?
I haven't thought through it enough.
Okay, fair
did
enough.
Matthew Pines specify someone that's been in the news recently? Did he specify
that's what
that?
he said. That's what he said. Someone you've seen in the news,
Wow.
it's like, okay, who is he talking about?
Yeah. What do you think? Maybe that might jog some inspiration in me.
I mean,
I've heard people say Jake Sullivan could be one of those people. I've heard.
oh, that's interesting. I haven't heard that.
yeah.
People said Trump. A lot of people said Trump, to be honest with you. But I thought, I don't know. Tim Gallaudet, maybe in a more official way. Ross Coulthard, I heard even. I was like, that's interesting. I don't know. I honestly, I have zero clue. Like, who's really on the news talking about UFOs a lot?
I just
You know what I mean?
I'm lost on that, and I just can't I mean,
Jeremy Corbell does the most like media appearances about UFOs, you know.
yeah, but it seems like it would be. I wouldn't go with Ross Coulthart because it seems like it's going to be someone that gives new credibility
Testimony.
to the
Yeah,
topic, and not
I
someone who's
agree.
been in this field for a long time. And
I agree.
I mean,
It's a military official, right? That's what I
yeah,
would
exactly. A
imagine. That
military
has to
official
be,
or
yeah,
someone
or
who works in one of
DOD or
the government agencies. Maybe I mean, well, Avril Haines hasn't been in the news recently, but Avril Haines would be like, I can't think of a better person than the director of national intelligence, Avril Haines. That would be incredible if she did. That would
James Clapper, you
James
know,
Clapper. Yeah.
he had some regrets about how the UFO topic was covered when, you know, he was around for a minute. So they're near the end of him working. I forget what administration. It must have been Trump. I think he was in the Trump administration, if I'm not mistaken. I saw a clip of that, of him giving, you know, talking about regret and how whatever. I thought, that's interesting. If someone like him came out, the question is it someone who you don't normally associate with the UFO topic who's going to come out and give credibility? Because that gives a lot more
I think it would
credibility,
be that. I think it would be
right?
that. Yeah, I think it would be that. And I think if someone like James Clapper came out, I think it would change the landscape.
100%.
At a certain
That's massive.
at a certain point, you have to ask yourself, well, why are these new people coming out? What are they? How big is this mind virus the skeptics talk about? Like, there's a limit. There's a, at some point it strains credulity that this mind virus is just like the entire government. Like, come on.
Sure. Yeah, I agree. I
I would
agree.
love
Well,
it if Barack Obama came out and said, I've been
well,
briefed on it. That would really,
he did
light a
say
fire.
some
He did
stuff,
say something, but I would
but
love if he went further than that.
more. I'm with you. I'm 100% with you. And I think there are people that have that knowledge. They just don't want to get tied into it, right? So, but even just taking at face value what Barack Obama, George Bush, and Bill Clinton have said, even Trump, but Barack Obama saying, no, there are things flying around in the sky and we don't know what they are. I mean, what more do we need at that point to support legislation to get into that,
Yeah.
right? Like in that sense, because all you're basically doing is activating an investigation with a few different little side offices to it, right? Like, okay, let's get on this. Let's do this. If there's nothing and it's not even that much money. If there's nothing there, like you said, then there's nothing to worry about. Let's put it to rest and
Yeah.
move on. And yeah, I'm with you.
I
Which
think
is
they call it
so
budget
interesting.
dust. The amount of
Yeah,
money used for, whatever this UAP Disclosure Act is going to cost is budget dust. And for people to say, well, I don't want the US government to spend the money. I mean, are you being disingenuous? Come on. They spend money on the stupidest things and this could put to
100%.
rest the UFO conspiracy. Come on.
I
You're
agree.
okay with it.
I agree. I couldn't agree more with that. I think no matter where you stand on it, you should support that. I mean, at the end of the day, in this topic, one of the biggest issues is just it's not people's opinion on the matter, in my opinion. It's just the way they deliver that opinion that becomes the issue. Right? So I don't have a problem with anybody being skeptical, hardcore skeptical, or hardcore believer into stuff. My mods are broken up into a whole spectrum of beliefs, and I like that. I like keeping everything around. I feel like the vetted audience is that way too. We've got a mix of everything along the spectrum. It's just how you present that opinion to people and how aggressive you are putting down other people for their opinion, right? Like that's okay. Now we're crossing the line. It doesn't matter what you believe. You're skeptic believer. I don't even care. This is, that, and that becomes a big issue. And I'm, like every topic for us as people, right? Sports, politics, you name the thing. It's basically like that, right? It's the same. It's not people's opinions. It's how they deliver them. So, I would hope that people in the UFO community would sort of acknowledge that and realize, because there's always talk about this is a higher thing. This is the greatest discovery of mankind. But you can't put aside your petty shit to talk about that. Like, that's crazy to
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
That's insane that trumps this reality that we could be having these fruitful dialogues about and learning and whatever, right? So yeah, I find that so fascinating, to be honest with you, which is why I don't I'm not on Twitter. I have the account. I post the episodes. That's it. I don't interact. I have a few times and it went wrong every time. And, and so I just, because I'm not clever. I'm just not clever to type something clever out or say something. You know what I mean? I'm not smart. So I'm just like, I'm out of here. I need, a lot of my things have nuance to them. I have to give nuance. I don't like commenting in letter form. That's why I like doing my open mics on my Discord or live stream or something where I can answer questions and give a nuanced take to it. Right. Like, do you find that yourself? Like you want to give more nuanced, which honestly, that is kind of your thing. I would say definitely in your videos, they're very nuanced takes because it's hard to give a direct answer to a lot of these questions, right? Like just a yes or no or a quick answer. It's like, what do you think about this guy? Right. I don't know. You probably get that a lot. What do you think about this guy? Well, oh my God. Well, what do you want me to say here? Like, that's a lot to judge someone and put a whole label on someone quickly for whatever. Right. So I don't know. Sort of interesting. So what are there any topics we haven't covered here, Ryan, that you're
Well,
like, what's been on your mind recently about all this?
yeah, I just wanted to say that one of the themes that I've heard a lot, and I've even heard Grush say this, and I found it particularly interesting, is that a lot of these officials don't want to speak. Um, they don't want to speak openly about this topic because a lot of them have the perspective that it's not them that should be doing it; it's the president of the United States. I mean, a lot of people like to say, why doesn't X, Y, or Z just, spill the beans? And it's like, because the person that spills the beans is going to be like a historical figure for thousands of years in some sense. And so a lot of people probably just perceive like, I'm not the one to be doing this. So if you're wondering why a lot of government officials are not like chomping at the bit to just like one day say, yes, there's something to this, is because they probably be like, that's not my responsibility. If anyone is to break this open, it should be the president of the United States. And maybe that's kind of what Matthew Pines is getting at. Maybe the people coming out are coming out not necessarily exclusively out of their own desires, but maybe they've been discussing this with like the Biden administration and other higher ups. And that's what's going to give them the courage to kind of make this go to the next phase.
Yeah, that's an interesting take that I don't think I've thought of, and it's like right there too, which is interesting. That the people, haven't come out to confess this, blow the lid, if you will, because they don't feel they're the right one to say it, like for history's sake, and that's interesting. I actually hadn't thought about that. But
Because
that's a good point.
Even Grush said that. Like he said, there are certain things that may
That's
not be
interesting.
classified, but he's like, that's not from me. I think there's an explicit quote where he said something to the effect of, I'm not the one to be telling you this. It should be the president of the United States telling you this.
Yeah. No, I mean that, and it holds the validity of, let's be real. It holds a lot more validity, credibility. It will be a moment in history, in time, right? The person that said it, the country that it came from, right? I mean, all of that, right? What city it was, like where it happened. This is what was told and what was shown that day. Because in my opinion, that statement can't come out with at least something behind it. Something, whether
Yeah,
it's
I
a
mean, we think about it,
craft or something,
it would be so irresponsible for someone high up in the government to break this open, and yet there's been no discussion among other officials on how to deal with the aftermath. And that's probably another thing that goes through these
good
officials'
point.
minds. Like, I can't just break this open and, be Barack Obama and be like, yes, I was briefed on this. What David Grush has said is true. Imagine the aftermath of that. How can you do that without having some plan and order and how to deal with the inevitable deluge of questions and
Oh,
media
sure.
coverage? Like, the CIA and all the other agencies would be like, what the hell did you just do?
It's like that scene in Iron Man at the end of the first one where he goes, "I'm Iron Man," and the whole room erupts, stands up, and has a bazillion questions. Right? Like it would essentially be that moment. And you're right, it wouldn't stop. again, that's why I think it would be
Like Grush
its
is
own
Grush was
separate
no
Pandora's
one knew who
box.
Grush was. No one knew who
Yeah.
Elizondo is. It's a completely different animal when someone who's been in the public space for a long time, highly credible, was a high level government official. If they start talking like Grush did or like Elizondo did, it's just a completely different animal. And I think just out of pure
interesting.
psychology, they're like, I'm not going to do that. Are you out of your
Yeah.
mind? That's not for me
Yeah.
to do.
Yeah. I'd be curious to know the plan that because I know that there's a group of people. I don't know who all the group is entirely, but I know there's a group of people behind the scenes with a plan to get disclosure out. They're working with a lot of the whistleblowers. These organizations are kind of all working together with this plan, right? That Matthew Pines kind of touched on. I'd be curious to know like what percentage of that plan is going according to plan, if you will, right? Does that make sense? Like what have you put out and it's worked that they want, or it didn't work? Like I don't know, right? We don't know what the plan is, so it's hard to judge. I'd be curious to really know what that is and what's working. Or is everything like, does that make sense? Like, oh, it's actually going exactly how they want it to go. Everyone relax. Or nope, this, that, the other. I mean, you'd have to imagine that the assassination attempt on Trump is unpredictable, right? So there's no way you could have planned for something so catastrophic, but I would imagine that has somehow affected things, and Biden having to drop out of the race, like just from an American standpoint, I get it's a global right issue, but I'm just, from an American standpoint, that's interesting, how those things could have affected. What other things could possibly be affecting their plan, out there? I don't know. Like
Yeah, I
other
mean
political events.
the threat of war with Taiwan and China,
Yeah, that's a good point.
the war between Russia and Ukraine. But I
Sure.
like I like what James Iandoli said in his interview recently. He said that with Jim Semivan, he said that
Oh yeah.
the time is never perfect. The time is
I
never even
agree.
good. It's never even good. So
Yeah, that's it.
you're always going to have a reason. You're always going to have reasons not to
Yeah.
disclose. It's always going to be disruptive. There's always going to be other things
Sure.
happening in the world. So what are you just going to keep kicking the can down the road indefinitely? It doesn't seem like a viable option.
It's like working out, right? They go, "Oh, it's not a good time." It's never a good time to start
Yeah.
working out. Just do it, or eating right, or whatever the thing is you want to do.
Exactly.
I'm with you. That's actually a really great point.
It's never a good time to quit a bad habit. It's never a good time to start a diet. I mean, you could always come up with reasons not to do it.
100%. Yeah, because life is constantly, dick punching you in the face. I might cut that out. I don't know why I said that. I don't even talk like that. I don't even talk like that.
I love it.
You know what I mean? So yeah, it's like this topic is always going to be facing, adversaries and pushback and this, that, and the other, right? A fight. Clearly there's an ongoing cover up, right? Which, to be honest, I don't think anyone should argue that. I can definitely see where the discussion is the cover up for extraterrestrial technology. But in my opinion, there was a cover up going on. There was shit going on, a lot of shit. And yeah, there's always going to be that going on. So you're right. What are we waiting for? Like, let's get this going. So, I mean, it sounds like that's where we're headed. Like, how you said you're pretty optimistic. Let's find out.
Yeah.
How optimistic are you that we're going to get basic disclosure, right, in the next 7 year? I think that's the plan, right? Since Grush came out, is that when the timers start? Like when Grush testified in Congress?
I think it was the New York Times article. So I think when they say 7 years, they're kind of starting from 2017, the late 2017.
Okay.
So we're in a
interesting.
very accelerated phase. We're in a very accelerated part of that quote unquote 7-year plan.
Sure.
And I mean, it makes sense. Like at this point, like what do you? We just had a hearing with David Grush under oath where he said that we're recovering craft and bodies. Like you can't. How long do you string that along? That's kind of pretty intense at that point.
I agree. And the next hearing, how do you not follow up on that?
Right. Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I know I'm optimistic, and one of the reasons I'm optimistic is because I just feel like, yes, it's true. If I'm right about UFOs, and I'll do my obligatory acknowledgement that yes, I could be wrong. I'm famous for saying that, and I don't do that as some kind of disingenuous perspective. I'm acknowledging I could be wrong. I could be completely wrong about the UFO issue, but from my subjective perspective, they've potentially been covering this up for over 70 years. You have to realize they've been doing that in an environment that's very different than the one we're in right now, because we have the internet. We have, not only is mainstream media more powerful and more global than ever before, but now you have independent media too. So people can have a lot of influence on the zeitgeist, and they're not tethered to legacy media. But also, there's also something that I've coined. Maybe I've coined it. I don't know. I don't know if anyone else came up with it. It's
We'll give you
called.
credit.
I think it's called the. What did I call it? I'm not even sure what I called it, but it's basically the accumulative principle, where people like to say, oh, this is just a recycling of the past, bro. We've been here before, and I don't know why I'm doing that obnoxious. What kind of accent is that? I don't even know what that is. I don't know. I hope I don't offend anybody, because I don't even know what that is. But they I just felt inspired to
We all
talk
do that.
like that.
No. There's a real guy out there walking around this world who actually talks like that, and he's like, "Why is everybody talking? Why is everybody talking like me? Like,
why are you using me as an example of someone saying something negative or bad or stupid? That is so." But it was like, listen, bro. We've been here before. This is just a cyclical outcome. We had hearings before. Haven't you heard all the black and white video coverage of Air Force officials saying there's something that is not entirely explained? We've been here, and my retort is that correct? And aren't we building off of that? Right? We've been there before, so by definition, we are building on top of that. We are layering on top of that. So what we're experiencing now has more weight by definition, because it's not being introduced for the first time. It is part of a long thread of UFO history. So it's by definition, the accumulation principle, I guess, it's going to have more weight and more credibility, because this has been going on for so long. It's not just like, imagine if Lou Elizondo came out for the first time, and we never had any UFO witnesses, civilian or otherwise, for 70 plus years, or weird like FOIA documents that suggest that there is a cover-up. Imagine that Lou Elizondo came out on October 11th, 2017, and no one's ever discussed UFOs before. Well, the power of that would be far diminished compared to the fact that there's so much preceding that. So when people say, well, it's just a recycling, no, it's not just a recycling. It's building upon what's come from the past, and therefore it's going to have more influence and have more impact upon the conversation and upon legislation. And we've never had UFO legislation before, not that I know of. Certainly not like this. So the people that say it's just a recycling, I'm going to have to disagree very strongly about that.
Once again, live from Washington, D.C., your host, Mike Farrell.
With all the UFO sightings reported over the years in America, the logical question is, if they really exist, why don't they visit the White House? And then there they were, all of a sudden, on July 26, 1952. The Air Force tried and failed to intercept up to a dozen UFOs in the sky over the White House. The press conference 2 days later became the largest media event since the end of World War II.
We can say that the recent sightings are in no way connected with any secret development by any agency of the United States.
With all due respect to the Air Force, I believe that some of them will prove to be of interplanetary origin.
In my position in the Research and Development Organization of the Bureau of Aeronautics and of the Navy Department, I am thoroughly familiar with both our aircraft and our guided missiles programs, and can state without reservation that the Navy has no saucer-shaped aircraft or missile in any of these programs.
Look at Robert Hastings' book, UFOs and Nukes. He's documented in such a meticulous way the history of sightings around places that house nuclear power or weaponry. Like, even that has factored into what we're experiencing now having more weight, because we're building upon UFO, not just governmental history, but UFO history also. It's like I said, if Lou Elizondo is coming out right now for the first time and there was zero UFO history and people are like, what are UFOs? We would not be where we are right now. So everything is accumulative, in my opinion, when it
Everything
comes to this
helps,
topic.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
everything chips away just a little bit
Yeah,
more.
exactly.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. It looks like it's like folds in a croissant. Okay, you got the first folds, and then you keep folding and then you've got the croissant, right? It's a very heavy, labored process that takes time, and that technique pays off in the end. So maybe there's something said that it's taken this long. Maybe in the end that was the best for us, right? How interesting would that have been if, let's say, the Roswell crash, they put out that first article, right? Flying saucer. But let's take a fork in the road here, hypothetically. Let's say that second article doesn't come out and they stick with that narrative. This is a flying saucer. This is right. And that becomes this reality. Like, how much different, would life be? Or, you know what I mean? Because that would be like a very first big introduction to Americans, at least the world, really, at that point. But then the first introduction becomes the reality. There aren't multiple times. Does that make sense? There aren't multiple backlog, because you could argue, to play devil's advocate, you could argue that accumulation of time, right, of stories and all this stuff could have a negative effect, in the sense that people might think, oh, it's just all bullshit. So that bag of information now is a bag of shit for some people, instead of a bag of, nope, this helps us grow and build on this new thing happening. So I do find that curious, to just think about where we would have split and how life would be different now if, I don't know. It's interesting to think about. So, hey, you ever seen that show? Oh God, it was on Amazon, and it was about like if Germany had won World War II, and it sort of drifted off into this alternate,
Oof.
reality. And I don't know. I find that interesting, because when I interviewed Avi Loeb, I remember him telling me, if we hadn't invested so much money into World War II, we would have disclosure by now, is what he said. And I found that interesting thought. I was like, so we can blame Hitler for why we don't know about UFOs right now.
Why is that? Because the money would go to research, or?
Yeah, supposedly there was this, as he put it, there was this, Churchill was apparently about to invest a lot of money into UFOs or something, and then he couldn't. He had to put it towards fighting the Germans. And I mean, Avi Loeb told me that. I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. I didn't know that, and that's kind of interesting to think about. Like, which is why I like to ask the question, well, what are some of those modern day examples like that? Like you spoke about earlier, the war in Ukraine, the war, right, Russia and Ukraine, the war in Israel, China, Taiwan, tensions, North Korea, right? That's interesting. Are some of these real world events holding us back? It's just humanity in general. Are we holding ourselves back by the way we live life and approach certain things? I mean, look at the divisiveness of just politics, people partisan, right? That is enough to completely make people go mad. Imagine if this reality of, we're not alone, we've been visited, and they might come and take you every once in a while, just so you know. Oh, okay. I, you know, I go up and down on, no, we need to know. We need to know the truth. It's our right as humans. But hang on, should we be taking some emotion out of this and looking at it, right, more just realistically of what could some of these effects happen, and is that worth it? Is humanity so far, are we that bad off not knowing the truth about this reality? Can we stay in limbo in the search for it? Is that better for us than to have until we have a complete grasp on it. And
which will never happen.
I agree. I agree. And that's interesting, right? So like you said, there's never a good time. So no matter what, there'll always be something blocking us. So it always circles back to, no, doesn't matter what scenario you throw out there. What if, the maybe, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, we've got to move past that and accept that fact, because then we can build on that fact, and building on these new realities is what got us to where we are. Once we realized the earth wasn't flat and it was round, we started opening trade routes and circling the earth, right? Like just clearly understanding these new paradigms, to use that word again, is important. It does help us move forward and be progressive and productive, so I don't know. Interesting, dude. This has been so cool talking to you, dude. I gotta admit, this has been a
Likewise.
really fun conversation diving into this. I could see us doing more of this for sure. What, to kind of take us out here, what's something I usually would ask, like, what's something you're looking forward to that's coming up, but you've kind of been already explained some of the things you're optimistic about. But I don't know, is there something you missed? Something you're looking forward to, like whistleblowers coming out? I don't know, just maybe even on a superficial level, documentary, a book, I don't know, movie, something, I don't know.
Yeah, I just let me say I'm cautiously optimistic about the future. I don't have a crystal ball. I have a bias to be optimistic, and I think that if you're too pessimistic, you might just lose all interest in the topic altogether, and that doesn't
Sure.
seem like a good path forward either. I'm optimistic just because I feel like too much has come out at this point. The credibility of the topic has reached a threshold. The only way that I think the cat could be put back in the bag is if the round Schumer legislation passed intact, and after an exhaustive investigation, they found nothing. Because I can't reiterate it enough. Imagine if they found nothing. What would David Grush say in the aftermath of that? What would Lou Elizondo say or Chris Mellon say in the aftermath of that? They would look bad. Let's just face it. They would look really, really bad. Because if you listen to Carl Nell and you listen to David Grush and you listen to Chris Mellon, they have all emphasized the necessity for the legislation to get passed. It's not like they've been passive observers. They've been saying explicitly that the legislation is the path forward. Well, what happens if the very legislation that they cited as the path forward is actually the means for which we learn on an official level that everything they said was true isn't? There's no coming back from that for David Grush. There's no coming back for that from that for Chris Mellon. And so I think that there's so much has come out, and there are very highly motivated people. I think David Grush is not the only one. I suspect there are other people who have the same kind of background that he does, highly credible, was entrusted by the U.S. government with the state's most important national security secrets, and these people are just going to keep coming out, in my opinion. And Matthew Pines said some interesting things are to come, and I'm not saying that's going to happen, but Matthew Pines felt confident enough to talk about it, so I think it's very plausible that will happen. And these new developments with new documentaries and Lou Elizondo's book, all of these things are going to accumulate and make it harder and harder to put the cat in the back in the bag. So it's not that it's necessarily impossible to put the cat back in the bag, but it's certainly over time, as this keeps escalating, it's going to become more difficult for those that want the secrecy to persist forever. It's going to be a lot more difficult for them to do so.
Yeah, well said. Wow. Yeah, well said, my man. Well, look, before we head out, let the people know how they can stay in contact with you in case there's someone that isn't aware of you. Your YouTube channel, your Twitter. Of course, I'll put all the links in the description, but however you want people to connect with you.
Yeah, so my YouTube channel is Post Disclosure World. My Twitter is Post Disclosure. And that really covers the bases. And I just cover the UFO disclosure process, primarily news and philosophy surrounding this topic. And that's basically what I do. And if you want to check my channel out, go for it.
Hell yeah. Awesome, man. Well, thanks again for coming on the show, Ryan. This was awesome. I can't wait to do this again, man.
I appreciate it, Patrick. I had a good time.
I live inside my own world of make-believe. Kids screaming in the cradles, profanities. I see the world through ice covered in ink and bleach. Cross out the ones who heard my cries and watched me weep.